They found her at the bottom of a 110-foot cliff, broken and bleeding, with 17 bones shattered throughout her body. The rescue workers thought they were recovering a corpse. Her husband stood at the top, screaming in panic, begging them to save his precious wife. But when they lifted her onto the stretcher and she opened her eyes for just a moment, he leaned close to her ear and whispered something the Thai rescuers couldn't understand. For words in Mandarin that turned her blood colder than the rocks beneath her. Behave, or you're dead. In that moment, as her body trembled with pain and her unborn child fought for life inside her, she realized the man who vowed to love her had just tried to murder her, and he was going to get away with it unless she found the strength to do what seemed impossible. Stay close, because what you're about to hear will make you question every promise you've ever believed. Before we continue deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Grace Chen, and if you had met her 3 years before that cliff, you would have thought she had everything figured out. At 32 years old, Grace had built something most people only dream about. She left her hometown in Pennsylvania with nothing but determination and a business degree, moved to Bangkok, Thailand, and within 2 years had established a thriving import-export company connecting American manufacturers with Asian markets. She worked 16-hour days, learned to speak Thai fluently, and earned the respect of every person she did business with. Her apartment overlooking the city wasn't just a home. It was proof that a woman could make it on her own in a foreign country without compromising her values or her independence. But success came with a price. Grace was lonely. She had business partners, employees, and clients. But when she came home at night, the silence in her apartment felt heavier than any workload. She hadn't been on a date in over a decade. Romance felt like a luxury she couldn't afford when she was building an empire. Her mother called from Pennsylvania every Sunday, always asking the same question. When are you going to slow down and let someone love you? Grace always laughed it off, but deep down, she wondered if she had forgotten how to be anything other than ambitious. Then one evening at a business networking event in downtown Bangkok, everything changed. She was standing near the buffet table, exhausted from making small talk with potential investors, when she heard someone speaking in a dialect she recognized immediately. It was the same dialect her grandmother used to speak, a specific regional variation of Mandarin that made her feel like she was back home in her grandmother's kitchen. She turned around and saw him. His name was Marcus Zhao, 33 years old, charming smile, well-dressed, confident but not arrogant. He worked in real estate development, he said, and had just moved to Bangkok from Singapore. They talked for 3 hours that night, long after the event ended, sitting on a bench outside the venue as the city lights flickered around them. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't laughed in years. He asked about her business, genuinely interested, taking notes on his phone when she mentioned challenges she was facing. When he walked her to her car, he didn't try to kiss her. He just smiled and said, "I'd like to see you again, if you'll let me." Grace drove home that night feeling something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Marcus pursued her with the kind of attention that made her feel like the only woman in the world. He showed up at her office with her favorite coffee before important meetings. He remembered every detail she shared about her life, her favorite childhood memories, the way she liked her tea prepared, the songs that made her emotional. Within 2 months, they were inseparable. Grace's friends warned her that things were moving too fast. "You barely know him," her business partner Sarah said over lunch one afternoon. "What's the rush?" But Grace was tired of being careful. She had spent her entire adult life planning, strategizing, protecting herself. For once, she wanted to just feel. Marcus seemed perfect. He respected her career, never made her feel guilty for working long hours, and talked about building a future together where both of them could thrive. When he proposed after 6 months of dating, Grace said yes without hesitation. They married in a small ceremony with close friends. No family from either side attended. Marcus explained his parents had passed away years ago and he was estranged from his siblings. Grace's parents couldn't afford the trip from Pennsylvania, so they video called during the ceremony, tears in their eyes as they watched their daughter finally find happiness. The first few months of marriage were everything Grace had hoped for. Marcus moved into her apartment and seemed genuinely excited about building a life together. But then small things started to shift. He began asking questions about her finances, how much the business was worth, who would inherit it if something happened to her. Grace brushed it off as practical planning. "We're married now," she told herself. "Of course we should talk about these things." Then one evening, Marcus came home looking stressed. He sat her down and confessed something that made her stomach turn. He had gambling debts, $140,000 owed to people in Singapore who weren't patient about collecting. He had been trying to handle it alone, he said, but the interest kept climbing and now they were threatening him. "I should have told you before we got married," he said, his voice breaking. "I was ashamed. I thought I could fix it." Grace felt the room tilt beneath her. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for suddenly felt fragile. But she loved him. She believed people deserved second chances. So she made a decision that would change her life forever. She paid $70,000 of his debt from her business savings and told him he needed to pay the rest himself. "I'm helping you," she said firmly, "but you need to take responsibility for this." Marcus thanked her with tears in his eyes. He promised he would never gamble again. He promised he would make it right. 3 months later, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She took the test alone in the bathroom of her office, hands trembling as she watched the second line appear. When she told Marcus that night, she expected joy, excitement, maybe some nervousness about becoming parents. Instead, his face went blank. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I mean, is it mine?" The question hit her like a slap. "What kind of question is that?" she said, her voice shaking. "Of course it's yours. I'm your wife." He apologized immediately, said he was just shocked, that he wanted to be a father but hadn't expected it so soon. But Grace couldn't shake the look she'd seen in his eyes for just a moment. It wasn't surprise. It was something colder, something calculating. In the weeks that followed, Marcus became distant. He stopped showing up with coffee. He worked late most nights and came home smelling like cigarettes and expensive cologne that wasn't his. When Grace tried to talk to him about baby names or preparing the nursery, he changed the subject. Then one morning, she found something that made her blood run cold. Marcus's phone was charging on the kitchen counter. A message notification lit up the screen. It was from a woman named Victoria. "I miss you. When are you leaving her?" Grace's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. She didn't need to unlock it to know what she would find. But she did anyway. There were months of messages, photos, plans. Marcus had been seeing Victoria since before they got married. He called her his real love, his future. He told Victoria that Grace was just a business arrangement, a way to secure his financial stability. In one message, he wrote, "Once I get access to everything, we can be together. She won't be a problem much longer." Grace felt the walls closing in. She confronted him that evening when he came home. She held up the phone, her voice steady despite the rage coursing through her. "Who is Victoria?" Marcus didn't even try to lie. He looked at her with those same cold eyes and said, "Someone who understands me better than you ever could." The fight that followed was the worst of Grace's life. She screamed at him to leave. He refused. He said the apartment was his home now, that he had rights as her husband. Grace realized in that moment that she had made a terrible mistake. But she was strong. She would survive this. She would protect her child and rebuild her life without him. What she didn't know was that Marcus had already made a different plan. A plan that didn't include her surviving at all. 1 week later, Marcus came to her with an unexpected proposal. "Let's take a trip," he said, his tone softer than it had been in weeks. "Before the baby comes, before everything changes. Just you and me, one last chance to fix this." Grace wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to stay away from him. But part of her, the part that still remembered the man she fell in love with, wanted to believe he was capable of change. "Where?" she asked cautiously. "Thailand has this beautiful national park," Marcus said, pulling up photos on his phone. "Folktale. There's a cliff overlook where you can watch the sunrise. It's supposed to be one of the most peaceful places in the world. I think we need that. I think we need to remember why we fell in love. Grace agreed against her better judgment. They drove 3 hours from Bangkok to the park, barely speaking the entire way. When they arrived at the trailhead before dawn, the air was cool and the sky was just beginning to lighten. Marcus seemed almost cheerful, carrying a small backpack and leading the way up the path. "It's just a little further," he kept saying. "You're going to love the view." When they reached the cliff edge, Grace stood there taking in the vastness before her. The valley below stretched out like a painting, mist rising from the trees. For a moment, she felt a flicker of peace. Then Marcus moved behind her. "Grace," he said quietly. She turned to look at him. His face had changed. The mask was gone. "I need you to know something," he said, stepping closer. "This was never about love. It was always about the money." Before Grace could respond, before she could even process what he was saying, he grabbed her shoulders and shoved her backward with all his strength. The last thing she heard before the world turned into a blur of sky and rock was his voice, cold and final. "Go to hell." Grace's body hit branches, rocks, dirt. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She felt bones crack, felt her skin tear, felt the baby inside her being crushed by the impact. When she finally stopped falling and landed at the bottom, she couldn't move. She couldn't scream. She could only lie there in a pool of her own blood, staring up at the cliff edge where her husband had just tried to murder her. Grace doesn't remember much about the first few hours after the fall. She remembers hearing voices, Thai voices, shouting for help. She remembers being lifted, the agony of movement making her pass out again and again. She remembers being in an ambulance, sirens wailing, someone holding her hand. When she opened her eyes in the hospital, the first face she saw was Marcus. He was sitting beside her bed, tears streaming down his face, playing the role of the devastated husband. The Thai doctors and nurses surrounded them, speaking in rapid Thai that Grace's foggy brain couldn't translate. Then Marcus leaned close to her, so close his lips almost touched her ear. He whispered in Mandarin, the language only the two of them understood in that room. "Nobody speaks Mandarin here. There's no evidence that I did anything. If you want to live, behave." Grace's entire body went rigid with terror. She wanted to scream, to tell the doctors, to beg them to arrest him. But she couldn't speak. Her jaw was broken. Her throat was raw. And Marcus was right there, watching her, warning her with his eyes that one wrong move would be her last. The doctors explained her injuries through an interpreter. 17 bone fractures, over 200 stitches, multiple surgeries required, and the baby was in critical condition. Grace spent the next 8 days in intensive care, every moment a battle for survival. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, playing the devoted husband for the hospital staff. He brought her flowers. He held her hand when doctors came in. He cried when they told them the baby might not make it. But whenever they were alone, even for a moment, his mask dropped. "Remember what I told you," he whispered. "One wrong word and I'll finish what I started." Grace had never felt so helpless in her entire life. The woman who had built a business empire, who had traveled the world alone, who had always been strong and independent, was now trapped in a broken body, unable to speak, unable to protect herself or her child. But something inside her refused to break. Even through the pain, even through the fear, Grace began to plan. She noticed that one of the nurses, a young woman named Molly, spoke some Mandarin. She had studied in China and sometimes tried to practice with Grace. Marcus didn't know this. One afternoon when Marcus left to get food, Grace caught Molly's eye and whispered in Mandarin, her voice barely audible, "Help me." He pushed me. Molly's eyes went wide. She glanced at the door, then back at Grace. "Are you sure?" she whispered back. Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He's going to kill me if I tell the police, but I need them to know. Please." Molly went to the Thai police that same day. She told them what Grace had said. The police came to the hospital and questioned Grace through Molly as an interpreter, making sure Marcus wasn't in the room. Grace told them everything. The affair, the gambling debts, the threats, the push. She expected Marcus to disappear, to run before they could arrest him. But he didn't. He stayed, confident that without witnesses, without evidence, it would be her word against his. The Thai authorities began investigating. They interviewed witnesses who had been at the park that morning. They found tourists who had heard shouting in a foreign language coming from the cliff. They reviewed Marcus's phone records and discovered the messages with Victoria, the gambling debts, and something else that made the case crystal clear. Marcus had taken out a $3 million life insurance policy on Grace 3 months before the trip. He had forged her signature on documents transferring partial ownership of her business to him in case of her death. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail. On June 17th, 8 days after Grace fell from that cliff, Thai police arrested Marcus Zhao for attempted murder. He was denied bail twice. His perfect mask finally shattered, and the monster underneath was exposed for the world to see. Grace's physical recovery took years. The doctors had to perform multiple surgeries to repair the damage to her bones. She had over 100 steel pins holding her body together. She learned to walk again through months of agonizing physical therapy. But the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was the loss. 2 weeks after the fall, Grace's baby died. The trauma to her body had been too severe. The doctors told her that natural conception might never be possible again. Grace grieved in ways that words can't fully capture. She had lost her child, her husband, her trust in love, and her sense of safety in the world. For months, she couldn't sleep without nightmares of falling, of Marcus's face as he pushed her, of the feeling of her body breaking apart. Her parents flew to Thailand to be with her. They stayed for 6 months, helping her through the darkest period of her life. Her business partner Sarah took over the company's operations while Grace focused on healing. Friends from around the world sent messages of support, but Grace felt alone in a way that no amount of love from others could fix. Marcus's trial took over a year. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The life insurance policy, the forged documents, the witness statements, the messages to Victoria. In June of the following year, a Thai court convicted Marcus of attempted homicide and sentenced him to 33 years in prison. Grace attended the sentencing via video call from her hospital room in Bangkok. She watched as the judge read the verdict, as Marcus stood there in his prison uniform, no longer the charming man she had married but a hollow shell of rage and entitlement. The judge asked if Grace wanted to make a statement. She did. Through tears, through pain that still echoed in every part of her body, Grace spoke directly to Marcus for the first time since the cliff. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "You took my child. You took my health. You took years of my life. But you didn't take my strength. You didn't take my voice. And you didn't take my future. I survived because I was meant to, and I will rebuild my life piece by piece until there's nothing left of what you tried to destroy. You will rot in that prison knowing that you failed. That's the only justice I need." Marcus stared at the screen, his face twisted with something that might have been regret or might have been hatred. Grace couldn't tell, and she realized she didn't care. He was no longer part of her story except as a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person. The screen went dark, and Grace closed her laptop. For the first time since the cliff, she felt something close to peace. The years that followed were not easy, but they were hers. Grace slowly rebuilt her business, working from home at first, then eventually returning to the office. She sold the apartment she had shared with Marcus and bought a small house on the outskirts of Bangkok with a garden where she could sit in the mornings and watch the sunrise without fear. She started sharing her story on social media, not for sympathy, but to warn other women about the signs she had missed. The love bombing, the isolation from friends and family, the financial manipulation, the sudden marriage, the secrets. Her posts went viral. Thousands of women reached out to her, sharing their own stories of narrow escapes from dangerous relationships. Grace became an advocate for domestic violence survivors, speaking at conferences and working with organizations that helped women leave abusive situations. She found purpose in the pain. 4 years after the cliff, Grace posted a video that made headlines around the world. She was standing on her own 2 feet, walking without assistance for the first time since the fall. The caption read, "What doesn't kill me made me stronger. Thank you to everyone who believed in me. Thank you to the rescuers who saved my life. And thank you to myself for refusing to give up." But the story didn't end there, because Marcus wasn't done trying to hurt her. From his prison cell in Thailand, Marcus filed for divorce. But he added a condition that shocked everyone. He demanded 30 million Thai baht, approximately $4 million, as compensation for his emotional and youth loss. His mother, who had never reached out to Grace after the attempt on her life, supported his claim. She even blamed Grace in a statement to the press. "If your business hadn't been so successful, it wouldn't have tempted my son to make this mistake." The audacity of the demand sparked outrage across social media. People called Marcus every name imaginable. They called his mother complicit in his evil. Legal experts said the case was unprecedented. A man who tried to murder his wife now trying to profit from the years he spent in prison for that crime. Grace fought the demand in court for 2 more years. The legal battle was complicated by international jurisdiction issues, by Thai and American law conflicting, by Marcus's refusal to cooperate with anything unless his demands were met. It felt like even from behind bars, he was still trying to destroy her. Finally, in October of this year, just weeks ago, a court in China where Grace had returned to live made a final ruling. The divorce was granted. Marcus received nothing. The court ordered him to pay Grace 500,000 yuan, roughly $90,000, in compensation for the trauma he caused. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was something. Grace shared the news on social media with a simple message: "Finally free. Thank you to everyone who stood with me. This chapter is closed." People around the world celebrated with her. They had followed her story for years, watched her fight, watched her rebuild, watched her refuse to be defeated by the man who tried to erase her from existence. But perhaps the most powerful moment came a few months ago when Grace traveled back to Pha Thame National Park in Thailand. She stood at the same cliff where Marcus had pushed her. But this time she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by the rescue workers who had saved her life that day, by reporters who had told her story, by survivors who had found strength in her example. Grace looked down at the valley below, at the place where she had thought her life would end. Then she looked up at the sky, at the sunrise breaking over the mountains, and she smiled. "I'm still here," she said quietly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Grace's story is not just about survival. It's about recognizing the signs before it's too late. It's about understanding that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like charm. Sometimes it sounds like love. Sometimes it promises you everything right before it takes it all away. Grace wants people to know that the red flags were there from the beginning, but she ignored them because she wanted so badly to believe in the fairness of love. The rushed timeline, the isolation from her support system, the financial questions that came too soon, the way Marcus made her feel guilty for her own success, the secrets about his past. Every single one was a warning she didn't see until it was too late. But she also wants people to know this: survival is possible. Rebuilding is possible. Finding yourself again after someone tries to destroy you is not only possible, it's a choice you can make every single day. Grace chose to fight. She chose to speak. She chose to stand when her body told her to stay down. She chose life when death seemed easier. And now, years later, she's helping others make that same choice. Would you have seen the warning signs in Grace's relationship? Could you have walked away before it was too late? Or would you, like so many of us, have wanted to believe that love conquers all, even when love was just a mask hiding something dark? Think about the people in your life. Think about the relationships that feel too perfect, too fast, too consuming. Think about the moments when your instincts whispered warnings that your heart refused to hear. Grace wants you to listen to those whispers. She wants you to trust yourself more than you trust someone else's promises. Because the cliff is real, and not everyone is lucky enough to survive the fall. If Grace's story touched something in you, if it made you think about your own life or someone you care about, share it. Talk about it. Let it be a reminder that strength isn't just about surviving. It's about refusing to let the worst thing that ever happened to you become the last thing anyone remembers about your life. Grace Chen is alive. She is whole. She is powerful. And Marcus Zhao is exactly where he belongs. Watching from behind bars as the woman he tried to erase builds a life more beautiful than anything he could ever touch. That is justice. That is survival. That is what happens when you underestimate a woman who refuses to die. Let us know in the comments. What part of the story affected you the most? Would you have had the strength to fight back the way Grace did? And have you ever ignored red flags in a relationship because you wanted to believe in love? We want to hear your thoughts. Your stories matter too. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that will challenge the way you see the world. Stories that breathe. Stories that remember. Stories that remind us all that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can find a way to rise. Thank you for watching. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time.